A poor girl collects bottles to pay for her grandma's life-saving surgery, but finds a suitcase full of money and decides to give it back to a young billionaire. He asks, "Why didn't you use it to save your grandma?" Her answer brings him to tears. The sky woke up grey that winter morning. Emma got up to the sound of her grandmother's weak coughing from the other side of the room. At 4 years old, she already knew what that meant. Mary wasn't well, and today would be another day of searching the city's streets for forgotten treasures. Sitting on her thin mattress on the floor, Emma watched Mary sleep. Her breathing was labored, as though each breath required enormous effort. The little girl rose silently and went to the small gas stove in the corner of the single room that served as bedroom, kitchen, and living area. Carefully, she lit the flame the way Mary had taught her and set some water to boil. The shack where they lived was on the outskirts of town, in an area people avoided mentioning in polite conversation. The makeshift roof of tarps and wooden boards leaked whenever rain was heavy, and the dirt floor stayed damp for days. But to Emma, it was the only home she had ever known, just her and Grandma against the world. By the time Mary finally woke up, Emma had already prepared a tea from herbs a neighbor had given them. "Good morning, my little angel," Mary said in a raspy voice, trying to sit up in the makeshift bed. "Good morning, Grandma. I made tea," Emma replied proudly, balancing the chipped mug in her tiny hands. Mary smiled, but her smile turned into a grimace of pain. She placed a hand on her chest and took a deep breath. "Is it hurting a lot today?" Emma asked, already knowing the answer. "Just a little, dear. It'll pass soon." But Emma knew it wouldn't pass. Mary needed doctors, expensive medicines, and a surgery that cost more money than they could gather in years. The doctor at the charity clinic had been clear on the last visit. Without the surgery, Mary's heart wouldn't hold out much longer. Emma didn't go to school like other children. There was no money for uniforms or notebooks, and besides, someone had to take care of Mary and try to earn some money. So every morning, after helping Grandma with breakfast and home remedies, Emma grabbed her cloth bag and went out into the streets to search for cans and bottles to sell at the recycling center. "I'll be back soon," Emma said, kissing her grandmother's wrinkled forehead. "It's going to be a good day, I can feel it." Mary ran her hand over Emma's messy hair. "Remember, Emma, always be honest. Anything that comes in the wrong way never brings happiness." Emma nodded. That was what Grandma always said, every single day that the little girl went out to gather recyclables. "I know, Grandma, I'll remember." Cloth bag slung across her shoulder, Emma left the shack and followed the dirt road. She knew the route to the center of town well, where restaurants and stores threw out bottles and cans that were like tiny treasures to her. The cold wind stung her face as she walked. Her coat, far too big for her small body, was a donation from a local church. The boots, 2 sizes too large for her feet, had been found in the trash and patched up by Mary. Emma didn't mind. She was used to living with what they could find. Once she reached downtown, she began her daily hunt. She rummaged through trash, cans asked at diners, checked behind restaurants. By late morning, her bag was already half full, but she knew she needed more. Much more if she hoped to help pay for Mary's medicine. That was when she decided to try somewhere new. There was an upscale hotel at the end of the main avenue, where wealthy people came and went with fancy suitcases and elegant clothes. Emma had never gone there before, intimidated by the security guards at the entrance. But today something compelled her to try. Skirting the building, she found a service area where delivery trucks pulled in. She hid behind some bushes and waited for a chance to approach the dumpsters unnoticed. When one of the workers went inside with empty boxes, Emma ran to the spot. That was when she saw something strange behind one of the large dumpsters. A suitcase. An expensive one, made of brown leather, partially hidden as though someone had left it there in a hurry or by mistake. Emma looked around. No one was there. Stepping cautiously, she approached. The suitcase wasn't locked. The latch was slightly open, as if inviting her to explore. Emma's heart pounded as her small fingers touched the suitcase latch. She was a little scared, but her curiosity was stronger. In one quick move, she opened the suitcase. What she saw left her breathless. Money. More money than she had ever imagined could exist in one place. Bills neatly organized in thick bundles, carefully stacked inside the leather suitcase. Emma picked up one bundle with trembling hands, running her fingers over the notes. It was real. All that money was real. Her child's mind quickly began to calculate what it meant. Money for Mary's surgery, money for medicine, money for a real house with walls that kept out the cold and a roof that didn't leak when it rained. Money for hot meals every day. Grandma could get better, she whispered to herself, clutching the bundle of bills against her chest. Images of Mary filled her mind, lying on her thin mattress trying to hide the pain she felt. Emma remembered the previous night when she had heard Grandma quietly crying, thinking the little girl was asleep. She remembered all the times Mary had refused to eat so there would be enough food for Emma. With this money, she won't have to suffer anymore. Emma looked around again. No one had seen her. No one would ever know. She could close the suitcase, drag it away, and never be hungry again. Never watch Mary get sick again. Her fingers gripped the suitcase latch, ready to snap it shut. But then, Mary's words echoed in her mind. Anything that comes in the wrong way never brings happiness. Emma froze. Mary had always been honest, even in the worst moments. Even when they had nothing to eat, she had never stolen or cheated anyone. She always said honesty was the one thing nobody could take from them. But Grandma needs the surgery. Emma argued with herself, tears beginning to roll down her dirty cheeks. If I don't take it, she's going to... She couldn't finish the thought. The idea of losing Mary was like a black hole that swallowed all the world's joy. With teary eyes, Emma stared at the money again. It would be so easy. But was it right? What would Grandma do? She asked herself in a low voice. The answer came instantly. Mary would return the suitcase. Mary would do the right thing, even if it meant continuing to suffer. Emma sobbed, placing the bundle of bills back into the suitcase. She shut it firmly, as if trying to keep herself from changing her mind. Tears now fell freely, blurring her vision. I can't, she murmured. I can't disappoint Grandma. The decision was made. With difficulty, Emma began dragging the heavy suitcase out of its hiding place. She knew where the police station was. She passed it often during her wanderings around the city. The journey was hard. The suitcase was heavy, and Emma had to stop several times to rest her skinny arms. People walked by, curious about the little girl dragging an expensive suitcase down the sidewalk, but no one stopped to help. By the time she finally reached the police station, Emma was exhausted. Her face still showed traces of tears, but there was a surprising determination in her eyes. She entered timidly, looking around the strange, intimidating place. A police officer behind a tall counter noticed her. "Hello there, little one. Are you lost?" he asked, leaning over to see her better. Emma took a deep breath and pushed the suitcase forward. "I found this behind that big hotel. There's a lot of money inside." The officer frowned suspiciously, but stood up and walked around the counter. When he opened the suitcase and saw the contents, his expression changed completely. "Good Lord," he whispered, looking from Emma to the suitcase and back to Emma. "Where did you say you found this?" "Behind the big hotel, hidden near the trash," Emma answered, trying to sound brave, even though she was frightened by the man's reaction. Soon more officers gathered around, asking questions and taking photos of the suitcase. Emma told them everything exactly as it happened, including how she had almost decided to take the money home, but remembered what her grandmother had taught her. "There's almost $200,000 here," one of the officers commented to another. "The little girl could have just disappeared with it. My grandma says anything that comes in the wrong way never brings happiness," Emma replied, holding her bag of recyclables tightly as if it were a shield. The officers exchanged impressed glances. One of them knelt down to Emma's eye level. "What's your name, sweetie?" "Emma. Emma Miller." "And where do you live, Emma?" Emma hesitated. She was afraid to talk about the shack, about Mary being sick. What if they wanted to separate them? But she decided to be honest. I live with my grandma at the end of Elm Street, in a little shack. While Emma waited, the police made phone calls and filled out paperwork. They offered her hot chocolate and cookies, which she accepted shyly, saving half for Mary. 3 hours later, the door of the police station opened and a man rushed in. He was tall, well-dressed, with dark hair slicked back and an air of importance. He looked worried and relieved at the same time as the officers led him to the suitcase. "Thank God," he sighed upon seeing its contents intact. "I thought I'd lost everything." The officer who had first spoken to Emma pointed to her, sitting in a chair far too big for her, her legs swinging because they didn't reach the floor. "You should thank that little lady. She's the one who found it and brought it to us." The man looked at Emma curiously. He walked over slowly as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "You found my suitcase?" Emma nodded, saying nothing. "And you brought it to the police by yourself?" Another nod. The man crouched down in front of her, looking into her eyes. "I'm Matthew Parker. This suitcase, this money, it's for a very important deal. If I had lost it..." He shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. "Why didn't you keep it? Plenty of adults would have." Emma lowered her gaze to her small, dirty hands. "I thought about it," she confessed in a low voice. "My grandma is really sick and needs an expensive surgery." Her sincere words surprised Matthew, who hadn't expected such honesty. "She has a heart problem," Emma continued, her childish voice breaking. "The doctor said she needs surgery or..." Emma couldn't finish the sentence. "But my grandma, Mary always says that anything that comes in the wrong way never brings happiness," Emma went on after a moment. "And the money wasn't mine." Matthew fell silent for a few moments, observing that child in oversized clothes with sincere eyes that seemed to see something many adults had forgotten. "You're a very special girl, Emma," he finally said. "Truly special." He stood up and spoke quietly with the officers. Then he returned to Emma, holding something in his hand. "I'd like to give you a reward for your honesty," he said, extending a bundle of bills. "This is yours by right. It's just a small fraction of what you saved me, but I hope it helps you and your grandma." Emma stared at the money uneasily. She thought about Mary, her medication, the surgery she needed. But something was bothering her. "Isn't it wrong to accept this?" she asked in a low voice. Matthew smiled. "No, Emma, it's not wrong. It's a well-deserved reward for your honesty. It's the right way to receive something." Emma still looked uncertain. Tears welled up in her eyes again. "I just don't want to see my grandma sick," she said, her small voice cracking with pent-up emotion. "I don't want her hurting anymore." Something in those simple, direct words hit Matthew like a punch to the gut. Suddenly his eyes filled with tears. He turned away quickly, trying to hide it, but he couldn't hold back. A tear rolled down his cheek, then another. The officers watched in surprise. Matthew Parker was known in the city as a ruthless businessman, always focused on results and numbers. Seeing him moved to tears by a child's words was completely unexpected. "Emma noticed his tears. Why are you crying?" Matthew tried to pull himself together, discreetly wiping his face. "Because you reminded me of something important I had forgotten," he answered in a choked voice. He offered the money again, and this time Emma accepted it timidly, putting it carefully into her coat pocket. "Thank you," she said. Matthew nodded, still fighting his emotions. "Emma, where do you live? I'll take you home." "It's far from here," Emma said. "On Elm Street at the end of town." "No problem," Matthew replied. "My car is just outside. Your grandma must be worried about you." Emma hesitated a moment. Mary had always told her never to accept rides from strangers, but Matthew no longer felt like a stranger to her. "All right," she finally agreed. As they were leaving the station, the officer who had first helped Emma approached Matthew. "Mr. Parker, that area is, well, it's not the best part of town." Matthew glanced at Emma, who was waiting patiently, clutching her recycling bag. "That's all right," he said. "I want to meet the woman who taught this little girl to be so honest." They left the police station together. A sleek black car waited at the curb, with a uniformed driver who opened the door for them. Emma had never been inside a car so nice, and was amazed by the leather seats and immaculate interior. "Elm Street, James," Matthew instructed the driver, helping Emma climb in. As the car pulled away from downtown, the urban scenery began to change. Elegant buildings gave way to simpler constructions, then to dilapidated houses, and finally to an improvised settlement on the outskirts. "It's over there," Emma pointed as they reached Elm Street, a dirt road lined with houses, made from all sorts of materials and makeshift shacks. As they drove deeper, the condition of the dwellings visibly worsened. The driver slowed down, glancing worriedly at Matthew in the rearview mirror. "It's at the very end," Emma explained, "where those trees are." When they finally arrived, Matthew felt a lump in his throat. What Emma called home was in fact a small shack made of scrap wood, cardboard, and tarps. The roof was patched with plastic, and the floor was bare dirt. A fragile construction that looked as if it could collapse in a strong wind. "You live here?" he asked, his voice betraying his surprise. Emma nodded, not understanding what was wrong. To her, it was simply home. "Let's go," she said, opening the car door. "I want to show Grandma the money you gave me." Matthew got out of the car and followed Emma down a dirt path to the shack's makeshift door. As they approached, he noticed small details showing care amid extreme poverty. A pot with wildflowers near the entrance, a broom leaned against the wall, the patch of ground in front swept clean. Emma knocked on the door. "Grandma, it's me. I brought someone to visit." There was a moment of silence, then slow footsteps, and finally the door opened. A thin, frail older woman appeared, her face pale but her eyes brightening at the sight of her granddaughter. Mary looked far older than she probably was, worn down by illness and hardship. "Emma, dear, I was getting worried." Her weak voice trailed off when she noticed Matthew. "Oh, hello, how can I help you?" Despite her obvious frailty, there was a dignity and courtesy in her tone that surprised Matthew. He had expected bitterness or resentment, but saw only kindness. "This is Mr. Matthew," Emma explained excitedly. "I found his suitcase full of money and took it to the police. He gave me a reward. Look, Grandma." Emma pulled the bundle of bills from her pocket and showed it to Mary, her eyes shining with excitement. "Now we can buy your medicine and maybe start saving for the surgery." Mary looked from the money to Matthew, her eyes filling with emotion and gratitude. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you." "Please call me Matthew," he replied, still processing the scene before him. "And I'm the one who should." "Thank you, your granddaughter." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "She's extraordinary." Mary smiled with a pride that lit up her tired face. "Would you like to come in and have some tea with us?" she invited. "It's not much, but it's offered from the heart." Matthew looked at the small shack, at Emma's hopeful face, at the kindness in Mary's eyes, and felt something inside him shift. All the luxury in which he lived, all the deals he made, all the money he accumulated, none of it seemed as valuable as that simple, sincere invitation. "I'd be honored," he answered, stooping to pass through the low doorway into Emma and Mary's little world. 3 weeks had passed since the day Matthew met Emma and Mary. In that short time, he had become a constant presence in their lives. Almost every day after work, his black car would park at the entrance to Elm Street, and Matthew would walk to the tiny shack, always bringing something: food, blankets, medicine for Mary. At first, Mary tried to refuse so much help. "You've done enough for us," she would say in her weak but firm voice. Yet Matthew insisted it was nothing, that he enjoyed their company, that he felt good being there. The truth was that this humble shack had somehow become, in an inexplicable way, a place where Matthew found peace. Away from luxurious offices, tense meetings, and people who only cared about his money, he could simply sit at an improvised table, drink tea from chipped mugs, and talk about simple things. Emma always greeted him with an enthusiastic hug. To her, Matthew was like a prince from one of the few storybooks Mary had managed to get for her. She didn't fully understand the world he came from, but she knew he was kind, and that was enough. That afternoon, however, Matthew arrived earlier than usual. He found Emma sitting outside the shack, hugging her knees, her expression worried, out of place on such a young face. "Hi, Emma," he greeted, kneeling to be at her level. "Is everything okay?" Emma shook her head. "Grandma couldn't get up today. She said she's just tired, but..." Her voice trembled. "She never stays in bed all day." Matthew felt a stab of concern. On his recent visits, he had noticed Mary looking paler, more fragile, coughing more often. "May I come in and see her?" Emma nodded, taking his hand to guide him. Inside the shack, the air felt stuffy. Mary lay in her thin bed, covered by the blanket Matthew had brought the previous week. Her breathing was audible, harsh, labored. "Mary," Matthew called gently. Her eyes opened slowly. A faint smile appeared on her lips. "Matthew, I didn't expect you so early," she murmured. "Emma told me you're not feeling well today." Mary tried to make a dismissive gesture with her hand. "I just need some rest. I'll be better tomorrow." Matthew approached and sat on the edge of the mattress. Even with little medical knowledge, he could see the situation wasn't good. Mary's skin looked ashen, her lips slightly blue. When he placed his hand on her forehead, it felt cold and clammy. "How long have you been like this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "It started last night, but I've had bad days before, don't worry." But Matthew was worried, very worried. He looked at Emma, who watched her grandmother with wide, frightened eyes. "Emma, can you get your grandma a glass of water, please?" When the little girl left, Matthew leaned in and spoke softly. "Mary, you need to see a doctor. You're not well." "Doctors cost money, Matthew." "I have money." Mary closed her eyes a moment. "You've done so much for us already. I can't accept more." "It's not about accepting or not," Matthew replied, his voice firm yet gentle. "It's about necessity. You need medical care, and Emma needs you." At the mention of Emma, he saw Mary's eyes fill with tears. "I'm afraid," she confessed, "if I go to the hospital, what if I don't come back? What happens to her?" Matthew then understood Mary's real fear. It wasn't the illness or the pain that scared her, but leaving Emma alone in the world. "I promise I'll take care of her," he said, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. "If anything happens, which it won't, because we'll get you the best doctors, but if it does, Emma won't be alone, I swear." Mary studied him for a long moment, as though evaluating the sincerity of his words. "Why are you doing this for us, Matthew? We're just strangers who crossed your path by chance." The question caught Matthew off guard. Why indeed was he so involved? He could have simply given Emma a reward and gone on with his life. "I can't explain," he admitted. "I just know that you two changed something in me. You reminded me of important things I had forgotten." Emma returned with the glass of water, walking slowly to avoid spilling it. Matthew helped Mary sit up to drink. She managed just a few sips before collapsing back, exhausted from the effort. "I'm calling an ambulance," Matthew decided, pulling out his phone. "No," Mary exclaimed with more energy than she seemed to have. "I don't want to scare Emma." Matthew looked at the girl, who was watching everything with anxious eyes. "Then let me take you to the hospital in my car. It's more comfortable and Emma can come along." After a moment's hesitation, Mary nodded. "Emma, honey," Matthew called, "I need to take your grandma to see a doctor. She needs help. We can't give her here. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, her eyes already wet. "Is she going to get better?" she asked in a low voice. Matthew wanted to promise yes, but he couldn't lie to her. "We'll do everything we can to help her get better." Gently, Matthew lifted Mary in his arms. She weighed alarmingly little, as though she were made of paper. Emma ran to open the door, and together they headed to the car where Matthew's driver waited. "St. Clair Hospital, James." "As fast as possible," Matthew instructed as he settled Mary in the back seat and helped Emma climb in. During the ride, Mary seemed to worsen. Her breathing grew more labored and she drifted in and out of consciousness. Emma held her hand, silent tears running down her face. "Grandma, please get better," she whispered. "Please be okay." Matthew had never felt so helpless as he did in that moment, watching Emma's silent anguish and Mary's struggle to breathe. When they finally reached the hospital, a medical team was already waiting, alerted by Matthew's call during the drive. Mary was quickly placed on a gurney and taken inside, leaving Matthew and Emma in the waiting area. "Where are they taking her?" Emma asked, clinging to Matthew's hand. "To where the doctors can take better care of her. Let's sit and wait for news, okay?" They settled into chairs in the lobby. Emma was restless, her eyes locked on the doors where Mary had disappeared. Matthew tried to distract her with stories and improvised games, but it was clear her mind was elsewhere. After nearly 2 hours, a doctor approached them. His face was serious. "Mr. Parker, may we speak in private?" Matthew looked at Emma, who seemed even more frightened by the doctor's request. "She's Mary's granddaughter. You can speak in front of her, but please be gentle." The doctor nodded, crouching slightly to Emma's level. "Your grandma is very ill, sweetie. Her heart isn't working right, and it's affecting other organs too. We're giving her medicines to help her feel better, but she'll need to stay in the hospital." "For how long?" Emma asked, voice almost a whisper. "We're not sure yet. We need to run some tests, but it's important for her to remain here so she can receive proper treatment." Matthew stepped in. "Doctor, what exactly is her condition?" "Advanced heart failure. She urgently needs surgery, but we first need to stabilize her and run more tests to figure out the best approach." "How much does this surgery cost?" Matthew asked without hesitation. "It's an expensive procedure, especially considering she'll need intensive care before and after. We're talking thousands of dollars." "Cost doesn't matter," Matthew declared. "Do whatever is necessary. I'll pay." The doctor looked surprised, then nodded. "I'll instruct the team to start preparations immediately. Mrs. Miller is asking for her granddaughter. Would you like to see her before we take her for further tests?" Emma immediately stood, anxious. Matthew accompanied her through the stark white hospital corridors, trying to prepare her for what she would see. "Your grandma's going to have tubes and machines to help her get better. It might look scary, but it's all for her benefit, okay?" Emma nodded, but when they entered the room and saw Mary hooked up to monitors, an oxygen tube in her nose and an IV in her arm, she froze at the door, shocked. Mary opened her eyes upon sensing their presence and tried to smile. "Emma," she called weakly. "Come here, dear." Emma approached hesitantly, staring at all the equipment with wide, frightened eyes. "Does it hurt?" she asked, gently touching her grandma's hand. "Not too much," Mary replied. "The doctors are helping me feel better." But even a 4-year-old could see that Mary was very sick. Emma leaned down and kissed her grandmother's cheek softly. "You're going to get well," she stated as though it were an undeniable fact. "I'll try, my angel." Just then, nurses came in, explaining that they had to take Mary for more tests. As they began wheeling the bed away, the reality of the situation seemed to hit Emma in full force. She ran to the bed, holding her grandma's hand. "No, don't take her. Grandma, don't go." Matthew gently placed his hands on Emma's shoulders. "Emma, they need to do this to help her get better." "But what if she doesn't come back?" Emma cried, tears now streaming freely. "What if she goes away like Mommy and Daddy?" Matthew's heart clenched. He hadn't known Emma had lost her parents, though he should have guessed given her circumstances. Mary, despite her weakness, reached out for Emma. "Emma, look at me. I'll fight with all I have to come back to you. But in the meantime, you have to be brave. Can you do that for me?" Emma sobbed, nodding reluctantly. "Promise you'll come back?" Mary hesitated for a moment, and Matthew saw the fear in her eyes. The fear of making a promise she might not be able to keep. "I promise to try with all my heart," she finally said. The nurses wheeled the bed away, and Emma stood there, watching her grandma vanish down the corridor. When the door closed, she broke down, her small shoulders shaking with desperate sobs. "I don't want my grandma to be sick anymore," she cried, her sobs echoing in the sterile hallway. Matthew knelt and held her as she cried into his shoulder. There were no words that could soothe that pain, so he simply held her, offering the only comfort he could give in that moment. Later, in a private waiting room Matthew had arranged, Emma sat curled up in a chair too big for her, eyes swollen from crying. A kind nurse had brought her juice and sandwiches, but Emma barely touched the food. "Emma," Matthew said softly, "the doctors say your grandma has to stay in the hospital for a few days, maybe even weeks." "I want to stay with her," Emma replied immediately. "I know you do, and you can visit her every day, but you can't sleep here at the hospital." And Matthew hesitated, realizing that Emma couldn't stay alone in the shack. "You can't stay by yourself at home." "I can stay with Mrs. Ramirez," Emma suggested, referring to a neighbor. "She's taken care of me before when Grandma was sick." Matthew shook his head. "Emma, your grandma will need a long time to fully recover. Even after leaving the hospital, she'll need a comfortable, clean place to stay, with someone to look after her." Emma's face showed understanding, then despair. She knew the shack wasn't that kind of place, but where will we go? Matthew took a deep breath. The idea had formed in his mind over the past few hours, and now he was sure it was right. "I have a big house with many empty rooms. I'd like to invite you to stay there with me while your grandma is in the hospital. And then, when she gets better, you two can stay until we find a better, more suitable place for you both." Emma looked at him skeptically. "Is your house far from the hospital?" "No, it's only about 20 minutes away. We can come visit your grandma every day, I promise." "And Grandma can stay there too when she gets out of the hospital?" "Yes, of course. I have a downstairs bedroom that would be perfect for her. And you can pick any other room in the house to be yours." Emma thought about it, her small face serious under the weight of the decision. "I don't know. Grandma always says we shouldn't bother other people." "You wouldn't be bothering me, Emma?" "Actually," Matthew hesitated, surprised by the truth of his next words, "I'd love the company. My house is too big for just one person." Just then, the doctor came in, reporting that Mary was stable, but would need to remain in the ICU for at least 48 hours. Preliminary results confirmed that surgery was necessary, which they would schedule as soon as she was strong enough. "She's asking for her granddaughter," the doctor added. "I think she wants to say goodbye before we move her to the ICU." Emma grabbed Matthew's hand, and together they followed the doctor back to the room where Mary was waiting, now surrounded by even more medical equipment. "Emma," Mary called when she saw them. "Come here, my angel." The girl approached the bed cautiously. "The doctors say I need to stay here for a while," Mary explained, her voice weak, "and you can't stay in the hospital with me." "Matthew says I can stay at his house," Emma replied, "and then you'll go there, too, when you're better." Mary looked at Matthew, surprised. "It's true," he confirmed. "I have plenty of space, and it would be an honor to have you both." Mary was silent for a moment, taking in the offer. "Matthew, that's so generous. I can't accept—" "Please, Grandma," Emma interrupted, her eyes brimming with tears once again. "I don't want to be away from you, and if you go to his house, I can see you every day." The doctor came in at that moment, saying they needed to move Mary to the ICU immediately. "Mary," Matthew said quickly, "please, accept this, for Emma, and for you too. You need a proper place to recover after surgery." Mary looked at Emma's distraught little face, then at Matthew. She was too exhausted to argue, and the truth was there was no other viable option. "All right," she finally agreed. "Thank you, Matthew." As the nurses took Mary away, Emma clung to Matthew, the fear evident in every line of her body. "She'll come back, won't she?" she asked, her voice choked. "We'll do everything we can to make sure she does," Matthew replied, holding her small hand in his. "Now let's go home. We'll come back tomorrow to see her." Emma nodded reluctantly. As they left the hospital, her tiny hand gripped Matthew's as though it was her only anchor, in a world suddenly frightening and uncertain. Emma's first night at Matthew's mansion was uneasy. Despite the soft bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, the spacious room with new toys Matthew had rushed out to buy, and the kindness of the housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson, she hardly slept. When the sun began to rise, she was already sitting on the edge of her bed, hugging the only item she'd brought from home, a ragged stuffed rabbit Mary had sewn for her from scraps. The room Matthew had prepared for Emma was on the second floor of the mansion, with a large window overlooking the garden. He had asked Mrs. Wilson to find some toys in the attic, leftovers from his own childhood, and had bought many more on his way home. There were also colorful children's books, crayons, and paper. Everything he imagined a 4-year-old could want. When Matthew knocked gently on the door in the morning, he found Emma already dressed, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound cheerful. "Did you sleep well?" Emma just nodded, but her tired eyes told the truth. "Are you hungry? Mrs. Wilson made pancakes." "I want to see Grandma," Emma said, ignoring any talk of food. Matthew nodded understandingly. "Sure, but we need to eat something first. Visiting hours at the hospital don't start until 10, and it's only 7:30. Emma followed him silently to the dining room. Her eyes widened at the enormous table set with delicate china and silverware. She paused at the door, suddenly intimidated. "Is something wrong?" Matthew asked. "Everything is so shiny," Emma murmured. "What if I break something?" Matthew had never thought of it that way. To him, such objects were normal, part of daily life. Seeing them through Emma's eyes suddenly made them feel ostentatious, almost absurd in their luxury. "Don't worry about that," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "If it breaks, we'll just get another." He helped Emma onto the chair, placing a cushion so she could reach the table comfortably. Mrs. Wilson brought a stack of pancakes with syrup, fresh fruit, and a glass of orange juice. For Emma, used to simple and often scarce meals, it was like a feast. "Can I really eat all this?" she asked, her eyes scanning the table. "Of course, and if you want more, just ask." Emma awkwardly picked up the fork. She was more accustomed to using a spoon, and cut a piece of pancake. Her first bite was careful, almost ceremonial. When the sweet flavor hit her tongue, she couldn't hold back a small smile. "Do you like it?" Matthew asked, watching her intently. Emma nodded, already cutting another piece. "Grandma makes oatmeal when she can, sometimes with a little sugar when we manage to buy some." The innocent remark made Matthew feel strangely self-conscious. The disparity between their lives had never seemed so glaring as it did in that moment, sharing a meal that was normal for him, but unimaginable luxury for Emma. After breakfast, Matthew showed the rest of the house to Emma. She followed him silently, wide-eyed at each new room. The library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, the living room with leather sofas and a marble fireplace, the office with a modern computer and expensive paintings on the walls, the backyard garden with a small fountain and well-tended flowers. "Do you live here alone?" Emma finally asked, her small voice echoing in the huge space. "Yes, well, Mrs. Wilson comes daily, and the gardener comes twice a week, But when they go home, you're alone?" Matthew paused, surprised by the question. "Yes, I am. Aren't you scared or sad?" He had never thought about it that way. Solitude was simply his normal state, something he accepted without question. "I guess I got used to it," he replied honestly. Emma nodded, as though understanding something profound. "I'd be scared. Our house is small, but Grandma is always there." At 10 o'clock, as promised, Matthew took Emma to the hospital. On the way, he stopped by a toy store to buy her a new doll and a bouquet of flowers for Mary. "To cheer your grandma up," he explained. The hospital looked even more intimidating in the morning light. Emma clung to Matthew's hand as they walked down the white corridors to the ICU where Mary lay. A nurse greeted them, explaining that visits were limited to 15 minutes. She had a stable night, but she's still weak. "Don't tire her." "Out," the nurse advised. Emma entered the room with Matthew, clutching his hand tightly. Mary was lying in bed, connected to monitors and an oxygen tube. She looked small and frail beneath the white hospital linens, but her eyes lit up when she saw her granddaughter. "My angel," she murmured, extending a trembling hand. Emma ran to the bedside, carefully taking her grandma's hand. "Grandma, I brought you flowers," she said, pointing to the bouquet Matthew held. "And look, I got a new doll." Mary smiled faintly. thanking Matthew with her eyes. "How are you, dear? Are you behaving at Mr. Matthew's house?" "Yes." "His house is huge, Grandma. There are so many rooms I can't count them, and breakfast has pancakes with sweet syrup." Mary tried to laugh, but the effort made her cough. Emma stepped back, alarmed. "I'm okay," Mary reassured quickly. "Just a little tired. The doctors say I'll be better soon." Matthew moved closer, placing the flowers in a vase beside the bed. "The doctors told me you're responding well to treatment, Mary. If you keep improving, you'll be ready for surgery in a few days." Mary nodded, but her eyes revealed concern. "And then what? How long until I can go back home?" Matthew and Mary exchanged a meaningful look over Emma's head. Both knew that home, the little shack on Elm Street, wasn't a suitable place for Mary's recovery after major heart surgery. "We'll figure that out when the time comes," Matthew answered diplomatically. "For now, just focus on getting stronger." The 15 minutes passed quickly. When the nurse returned to say their time was up, Emma clung to her grandma's hand, reluctant to leave. "I'll come back tomorrow, Grandma, I promise." "I know, dear. Be a good girl and do what Mr. Matthew says, okay?" Emma nodded, swallowing her tears. Matthew took her hand, and together they left the room, casting one last reassuring glance at Mary. In the car, Emma was quiet, clutching her new doll as if it were a lifeline. "She looked so small," she finally murmured. Matthew had no easy reply. It had also shocked him to see Mary, normally so dignified despite her poverty, reduced to such extreme fragility among medical equipment. "The doctors are taking good care of her," he managed to say. "She'll get better." The following days settled into a routine. In the morning, after breakfast, Matthew took Emma to see Mary. Then they returned home for lunch, and in the afternoon, Matthew tried to keep Emma entertained, reading stories, watching children's movies he barely remembered from his own childhood, or letting her play in the garden while he worked on his laptop. Nights were the hardest. Emma often had nightmares, waking up crying and calling for her grandma. The first few times, Matthew didn't know what to do. He tried calling Mrs. Wilson, but she lived too far away to come in the middle of the night. So he ended up sitting on the edge of Emma's bed, awkwardly stroking her hair until she fell back asleep. "My mum never did this," he found himself thinking one night, watching Emma finally relax into slumber. "When I had nightmares, I was alone in the dark. The memory led to others." His privileged childhood in material terms, but lacking emotional warmth. Parents always busy with their own interests, his father with business, his mother with social events. Nannies and tutors came and went, some kind, others indifferent, but none truly present as a constant figure in his life. Birthday parties with dozens of children he barely knew, expensive toys that failed to fill the void left by absent parents, private schools that taught him how to compete and win, but never how to connect emotionally with others. By contrast, he saw Emma and Mary, with nothing in material terms, living in a shack that barely sheltered them from the elements, often hungry, constantly on the brink of disaster, yet with a love so evident, so tangible, that it created a kind of wealth all his money had never been able to buy. In the second week, something began to change in the dynamic between Matthew and Emma. The little girl no longer looked at him with suspicion, and he was surprised to find himself developing a sense of responsibility beyond the self-imposed duty to look after her while Mary was hospitalized. He started noticing little things, how Emma liked stories to be read with different voices for each character, how she always saved part of her dessert to take to Grandma tomorrow, even though they explained Mary couldn't eat sweets in the hospital, how she would hum quietly while playing alone, singing songs Mary had likely taught her. One afternoon, while Matthew worked in his office, Emma crept in silently and sat on the floor beside his desk, drawing with the colored pencils he'd given her. Occasionally, she held up her artwork for him to see, and he would stop what he was doing to praise her efforts. The simple act of sharing the same space in comfortable silence, each engaged in their own activity but aware of the other, gave Matthew a feeling of peace he couldn't explain. "What are you doing?" Emma asked after a while, curious about the spreadsheets on his computer screen. "Work. Checking numbers for an important deal." "Is it hard?" "A little, but I'm used to it. Do you like it?" The simple question caught him off guard. Did he like what he did? He had never really asked himself. He had entered his father's business, expanded the company, accumulated more wealth than he could spend in several lifetimes. But like it? "It's what I know how to do," he finally answered. Emma seemed to accept that, returning to her drawing. But her innocent question planted a seed of restlessness in Matthew. He spent the rest of the afternoon staring at the numbers on his screen, while his mind drifted toward unknown territories, questioning choices he had never before found questionable. When Mary reached 2 weeks in the hospital, the doctors finally announced she was strong enough for surgery. Matthew and Emma visited her the day before the procedure. Mary seemed anxious but tried to maintain a confident smile for her granddaughter. "It's a routine surgery," the doctor had assured Matthew earlier. "But given her age and the advanced stage of her disease, there are risks. She knows that." While Emma excitedly talked about a squirrel she had seen in the garden, Matthew observed the interaction between grandmother and granddaughter. There was an intimacy, a language of looks and subtle gestures that spoke of years sharing joys and pains, building a bond that defied their dire circumstances. For a moment, he felt like an intruder, witnessing something precious and rare that he had never experienced. He had spent his life accumulating money, properties, power, prestige, and here was a woman with nothing but her dignity and her granddaughter's love, yet she seemed infinitely richer in everything that truly mattered. That night, after tucking Emma into bed with the promise they would go to the hospital early the next day, Matthew sat alone in his library with a glass of whiskey. The house, which had always seemed appropriately spacious, now echoed with a hollowness he could no longer ignore. He thought about his parents, both deceased years ago. His father, forever focused on the next deal, the next million. His mother, obsessed with appearances and social status, neither really present, even when physically there. His memories of them were distant, like photographs of people he had only known superficially. By contrast, he thought of Emma, how in just 2 weeks she had become such a presence in his life. How the house felt different with her occasional laughter, her colorful drawings scattered on the dining room table, her tiny shoes by the door. How he was beginning to anticipate her likes and preferences, feeling a strange satisfaction when he guessed right. "They taught me to value all the wrong things," he murmured to himself, looking around at the room filled with expensive antiques and rare books he rarely read. "I spent my whole life chasing what I thought mattered." A realization began to form in his mind, uncomfortable yet undeniable. His mansion full of expensive possessions was in many ways as empty as Emma and Mary's shack was full. Not with things, but with something far more valuable, genuine. Affection, trust, and a willingness to sacrifice for one another. Matthew glanced at his whiskey, a 12-year single malt that cost more than Mary and Emma spent on food in a month. Suddenly its taste turned bitter. True poverty, he thought, isn't about lacking possessions. The weight of that insight followed him into restless sleep that night. As in the room next door, Emma slept, hugging her ragged rabbit, dreaming of her grandma and better days to come. The hospital waiting room was quiet that morning. Matthew flipped absent-mindedly through a magazine, while Emma, seated next to him, swung her legs nervously. Her tiny fingers clutched the ragged rabbit Mary had made her. "How much longer will it be?" Emma asked for the 5th time in half. "An hour." "I'm not sure," Matthew answered patiently. "Heart surgeries are complicated and take time." Mary had been in the operating room for 4 hours. Before they took her in, she had held Emma's hand and promised she would fight, with all her strength, to return. Emma insisted on staying at the hospital the whole time, and Matthew hadn't the heart to say no. "What if she doesn't wake up?" Emma whispered, her wide eyes fixed on Matthew. Matthew set the magazine aside and turned to face her. In the 3 weeks Emma had lived in his house. He had learned that she valued honesty above all else, certainly something she had learned from Mary. "There's that risk," he answered carefully. "But this is the best medical team in the city, and your grandma is very strong. Remember how much she improved over the last few weeks? The doctors say that's a good sign." Emma nodded, hugging her rabbit tighter. "Grandma is the strongest person I know," she said with conviction. They remained silent for several minutes. Matthew watched Emma discreetly, admiring the resilience of this 4-year-old who had already faced more hardship than many adults. Finally, the waiting room door opened, and Dr. Roberts, the cardiac surgeon in charge of Mary's case, walked in. His face was tired from the long procedure, but a slight smile curved his lips. Matthew and Emma stood at the same time. "How is she?" Matthew asked before Emma could speak. The doctor approached, bending slightly to Emma's eye level. "The surgery was a success," he announced. "We managed to repair the damage to your grandma's heart, and she's responding well." Emma let out a deep sigh as though she had been holding her breath ever since Mary entered the operating room. "She's going to be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It'll take time, but yes, she should recover very well. Her heart is already beating stronger." Silent tears began rolling down Emma's cheeks. Without thinking, Matthew knelt and held her. To his surprise, Emma threw herself into his arms, sobbing against his shoulder. "It's all right," he murmured, stroking her hair. "Your grandma is strong, remember? She made it." The doctor smiled at the scene, then continued, "Mary is in the recovery room now. She's still under anesthesia, but she should wake up in the next few hours. You'll be able to see her briefly when she's transferred to the ICU." "How long will she stay in the hospital?" Matthew asked. "If all goes well, about 2 weeks. The first few days are critical to watch for any complications, but after that it's mainly recovery and getting used to the new medication." After the doctor left, Matthew took Emma to the hospital cafeteria. She had refused to eat anything that morning, but now that she had relief from the good news, her stomach growled audibly. "Let's get something to eat while we wait for your grandma to wake up," Matthew suggested. As Emma nibbled on a sandwich, Matthew watched her thoughtfully. Over the past weeks, an idea had been forming in his mind, something he initially dismissed as impulsive, but now seemed increasingly right. "Emma," he began carefully, "do you and your grandma like that shack where you live?" Emma looked at him, surprised by the question. "It's our home," she answered simply. Then thoughtfully she added, "But the roof leaks when it rains hard, and it gets really cold in winter. You know that once your grandma recovers from the surgery, she'll need a more suitable place to live, right? Somewhere without leaks, without dampness, with clean water and reliable electricity." Emma frowned, taking it in. "But we don't have anywhere else." Matthew took a deep breath. "What if I helped you find a better place?" Before Emma could respond, a nurse approached their table. "Mr. Parker, Mrs. Miller is waking up. You can see her for a few minutes now." Emma jumped up from her chair, forgetting her sandwich. Matthew quickly paid and followed her to the elevator leading to the ICU. Mary was in a private ICU room, a luxury Matthew insisted on paying for. When they entered, she looked frail against the crisp white sheets, connected to monitors with a visible dressing on her chest, partly covered by the hospital gown. Her eyes were half open, still fighting off the anesthesia. "Grandma?" Emma called softly, stepping forward on hesitant feet. Mary turned her head slowly toward the voice. A weak smile touched her pale lips. "My angel," she murmured, her voice rough and low. Emma moved closer, eyeing the tubes and wires nervously. "Can you hug me?" she asked timidly. "Watch the tubes, dear," advised the nurse who had accompanied them, "but a gentle hug won't hurt." Very carefully, Emma leaned over the bed and gave her grandma a soft embrace. Mary lifted a trembling hand to stroke her granddaughter's hair. "The doctor said you're going to get better," Emma said, her voice filled with relief. "Your heart is stronger now." "I promised I'd fight, didn't I?" Mary whispered. Her eyes found Matthew's standing by the door. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Matthew only nodded, feeling a strange tightness in his throat. There was something profoundly moving about the scene. The small child beside the elderly grandmother, both so vulnerable in different ways, yet bound by a love strong enough to overcome any challenge. In the days that followed, Mary continued to improve. She was transferred from the ICU to a regular room where Emma could visit for longer periods. Matthew reshaped his work schedule to bring Emma to the hospital daily, often staying there with her for hours. 1 week after the surgery, while Emma was distracted by a nurse teaching her how to make origami in a corner of the room, Matthew took the opportunity to speak with Mary. "The doctors say you're recovering very well," he began. "Better than they expected, in fact." Mary smiled faintly. "I have a good reason to get strong," she said, looking at Emma. "Mary," Matthew continued, lowering his voice, "we need to talk about what happens when you're discharged." The smile left Mary's face, replaced by a worried expression. "I know our shack isn't a place for proper recovery," she said. "I was thinking of asking the local church if they had some sort of temporary shelter." "That won't be necessary," Matthew interrupted gently. "Actually, I bought a house for you." Mary stared at him, stunned. "You what?" "It's a small but comfortable house in a neighborhood called Cedar Heights. It has 2 bedrooms, a living area, a kitchen, and a full bathroom. The yard isn't huge, but there's enough space for Emma to play. It's only 10 minutes from the hospital in case you need follow-ups." Mary blinked several times, as if trying to process this information. "Matthew, I can't accept something like that. It's too much. Please don't see it as charity," he said quickly. "Consider it an investment in Emma, in her future. And honestly, in my own peace of mind, I wouldn't be able to sleep knowing you both went back to that shack." After all this, Mary remained silent for several moments, glancing at Emma across the room. "Have you told her yet?" "No," Matthew replied. "I wanted to talk to you first." Mary let out a long sigh. "Why are you doing all this for us, Matthew? We're just strangers who happened into your life by chance." Matthew paused to think before answering. "Maybe at first it was just gratitude for Emma's honesty, or guilt because I have everything while you had nothing. But now," he paused again, searching for the right words, "now you two have shown me something I never really had or understood. A connection, a sense of family, even though we're not related by blood." Mary studied him for a long moment, her weary but perceptive eyes taking him in. "You're a good man, Matthew Parker," she finally said. "Better than you probably believe." 6 days later, the doctors announced Mary was ready to be discharged. Her recovery would still be lengthy, months of medication, supervised exercises, and regular cardiologist visits, but she was strong enough to continue healing at home. On the morning of her discharge, Emma was so excited she could hardly eat breakfast. Ever since Matthew had told her about the new house 3 days earlier, she'd talked about it constantly. Her own room, a real shower, a working fridge. "Can we go get Grandma now?" she asked for the 10th time, while Matthew tried to encourage her to finish her cereal. "As soon as you finish eating," he replied patiently. "And remember, your grandma is still weak. She'll need lots of rest and calm." Emma nodded, solemnly. "I'll take care of her," she declared seriously. "I always have." Matthew felt a pang at those words. It was easy to forget that despite being only 4 years old, Emma carried responsibilities no child should have. Responsibilities he now hoped to ease. "Now it's her turn to rest and your turn just to be a child," he said gently. "You both deserve that." When they finally arrived at the hospital, Mary was already dressed and sitting on a chair next to the bed, with a small bag of her few belongings. She wore new clothes, gifts from Matthew, who noticed she owned nothing suitable for the cold weather except a worn-out coat. When Emma entered the room, Mary's face lit up. The girl ran to her, stopping abruptly a few steps away, remembering she had to be gentle. "Can I hug you, Grandma?" she asked cautiously. "Of course you can, my angel," Mary replied, opening her arms. Emma hugged her carefully, as though her grandmother were made of porcelain. "You're coming home now," she said, her voice muffled against Mary's shoulder. "Our new home." Mary looked over Emma's head at Matthew, who was watching with a peaceful smile. Something had changed in him since meeting Emma, a softness replacing the usual reserve of a businessman. A nurse arrived with a wheelchair, standard protocol for patients leaving the hospital. "Ready for the big adventure?" he asked cheerfully. Mary allowed herself to be settled into the wheelchair, Emma walking beside it, holding her hand, as though afraid her grandmother might vanish if she let go. The trip to the car was slow. Mary still tired easily, and every small effort required a pause to catch her breath. Matthew had brought his most comfortable car, a spacious sedan rather than the sports car he usually drove, to make things easier. "Are we going straight to the new house?" Emma asked, already settled in the back seat next to her grandma. "Yes," Matthew replied, "everything's ready for you." The drive to Cedar Heights took about 20 minutes. It was a middle-class neighborhood with well-maintained houses and small but pleasant yards. Nothing ostentatious, but infinitely better than Elm Street. Matthew parked in front of a brick house with a small front porch. Freshly planted flowers filled the window boxes, and the paint on the door and windows looked new. "This is it," he announced, getting out to help Mary. Emma was the first to get out, staring wide-eyed at the house. "Is it really ours?" she asked, incredulous. "Really ours," Matthew confirmed, helping Mary out of the car gently. Mary stood on the sidewalk for a moment, taking in the house with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Matthew, this is—" she began, but words failed her. "Let's go inside," he suggested kindly, offering his arm to support her. The interior of the house was simple but cozy. There was new furniture that wasn't extravagant, a small couch in the living room, a recliner angled toward a modest television. The kitchen was compact but functional, with basic appliances and a round table near a window overlooking the backyard. "I want to show you your bedroom, Grandma," Emma exclaimed, gently tugging Mary's hand. The main bedroom was on the ground floor, a deliberate choice by Matthew so Mary wouldn't have to climb stairs while recovering. It was a bright room with a double bed, a small wardrobe, and a dresser. A wide window let in natural light through sheer curtains. "Look, there's a private bathroom just for you." Emma pointed to an adjacent door, where a fully equipped bathroom had been fitted with safety bars and a raised toilet seat, details Matthew had researched as important for cardiac patients' recovery. Mary sat on the edge of the bed, visibly moved. "You thought of everything," she said to Matthew, who stood in the doorway. "I had help," he admitted. "I spoke to a nurse who specializes in cardiac rehab. She gave me lots of suggestions to make the house better suited to your current needs." Emma had already rushed out, eager to explore the rest of the house. Her excited footsteps could be heard upstairs, along with little gasps of delight. "I'll never be able to repay this," Mary said, glancing around. "The comfortable room." "It's not meant to be repaid," Matthew replied simply. "It's a gift." Before Mary could respond, Emma came running back, breathless with excitement. "Grandma, my room has a bookshelf full of books and a bed with a purple blanket, and there's a desk for when I start school." School. The word hung in the air. For a moment, Mary looked at Matthew questioningly. "I already enrolled her in the local elementary school," he admitted. "They have a program for 4-year-olds, kind of a pre-kindergarten. If that's all right with you, of course. I thought it would be good for her to meet other kids, learn new things. Can I really go to school?" Emma asked, eyes bright with excitement. Mary smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Of course you can, my angel. It's all I ever wanted for you." Over the following days, a routine began to form. Matthew hired a nurse to visit Mary daily, checking her vitals and helping with the prescribed recovery exercises. Thoughtfully, he'd chosen an older nurse with a warm personality who quickly earned Mary's trust. He also arranged for a private doctor to make regular visits, sparing Mary the effort of frequent hospital trips. All her medications were delivered to the house on schedule, and a monthly account was set up at the local grocery store, so Mary and Emma could get fresh food without worrying about costs. Emma started attending school in the second week after the move. Initially anxious, she had never been in a school setting before. She soon adapted, returning home each day with cheerful stories of new friends and class activities. Matthew adjusted his work hours so he could pick her up daily, often staying for dinner before returning to his own house. One afternoon, about a month after Mary's discharge, Matthew arrived to pick Emma up and found Mary on the front porch, enjoying the mild evening sun. She looked noticeably better. Her cheeks had more color, and though still thin, she no longer seemed so frail. "How do you feel today?" he asked, sitting in a chair beside her. "Stronger every day," Mary answered. "The nurse says my recovery is above expectations. I'm glad to hear it." They sat in silence for a moment, watching a butterfly land on the newly planted flowers. "Matthew," Mary began, her tone more serious, "I want to thank you. Not just for the house, the doctors, all of that." She made a gesture that encompassed the porch, the home, "but especially for what you've done for Emma." Matthew looked at her, surprised. "She's much happier," Mary continued. "Not just because she has things she never had before, though that's important, but because she has someone else who cares about her besides me, someone she can trust." "She's an incredible kid," Matthew replied sincerely. "Anyone would care." "No, not anyone," Mary said gently. "You could have just given some money, found us a place to stay, and gone on with your life. But you're here. You pick her up from school, listen to her stories, make sure she's happy." Matthew didn't know how to respond. The truth was that his life had changed completely in the past weeks. Business, which used to consume his every waking moment, now seemed secondary. He had delegated more tasks, reorganized priorities, all so he could be present in Emma's life, and by extension Mary's. "She's taught me a lot," he finally admitted. "She has that effect on people," Mary smiled. "Since she was a baby, Emma always had this special light. Even in the worst situations, when we lost everything after her parents died, when we had to move into that shack, she never lost the ability to find joy in small things." The sound of a school bus approaching interrupted their conversation. Moments later, Emma came running up the street, her purple backpack bouncing on her shoulders, a colorful drawing in hand. "Matthew." "Grandma," she called, rushing to the porch. "Look what I made today." The drawing showed 3 stick figures, a small one with yellow hair labeled Emma, a taller one with gray hair labeled Grandma, and an even taller one in a suit labeled Matthew. "It's our family," Emma explained proudly. "My teacher told us to draw our family." Matthew felt something squeeze in his chest. Family. The word caught him off guard. Mary noticed his reaction and gently touched his arm. "To Emma, you're family now," she said softly. "I hope that doesn't bother you." "No," Matthew replied, his voice strangely husky. "Not at all." While Emma dashed inside to get a snack, Matthew stayed on the porch, holding the drawing in his hands. Staring at the simple stick figures, he felt a surge of emotion that he couldn't name. Perhaps a mixture of gratitude, joy, and a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. For the first time in his adult life, Matthew Parker felt he had found something all his money had never been able to buy. A place where he belonged, and people who cared for him simply for who he was, not for what he possessed. And that, he realized, was worth infinitely more than any successful deal or hefty bank account. Autumn arrived in Cedar Heights, painting the trees red and gold. 6 months had passed since Mary's surgery, and the transformation in their lives was almost as noticeable as the changing of the seasons. Mary had regained much of her health. She still had difficult days and needed regular medication, but the frail, sickly look was gone. Now she could walk around the neighborhood without getting tired, tend her small garden out front, and even bake cinnamon rolls that filled the kitchen with a comforting aroma. Emma, now nearly 5, was flourishing. In school, her teachers described her as bright and eager to learn, quickly making up for lost time. She had made friends, joined after-school activities, and came home each day with new drawings and stories to tell. As for Matthew, he had found a surprising balance between his work and the time he spent with Emma and Mary. Almost every afternoon, he picked Emma up from school and drove her home. He stayed for dinner several times a week, helped Emma with her schoolwork, and on weekends the three of them often went out together, to the park, the zoo, or just to get ice cream. On a Thursday morning, Matthew was reviewing reports in his office when his secretary Diane knocked on the door. "Mr. Parker, Mr. Takahashi and his team have just arrived for the 10 o'clock meeting." Matthew glanced at the clock, surprised. He'd been so absorbed he hadn't noticed the time. "Thank you, Diane. Please take them to the conference room. I'll be there in a minute." As he straightened his tie and gathered the necessary documents, Matthew smiled at the photo on his desk, a picture of him with Emma and Mary at the city zoo taken the previous month. It was the first time he'd put personal photos in his office. The meeting with Mr. Takahashi, CEO of one of Japan's largest tech conglomerates, was crucial. Parker Enterprises had developed an innovative software for supply chain management, and the Japanese conglomerate was interested not only in acquiring it, but in forming a long-term partnership. "Mr. Parker," Takahashi greeted him with a formal bow, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." The next 2 hours were devoted to technical presentations, discussions on system integrations, and financial projections. Matthew's team was well prepared, and the Japanese executives seemed visibly impressed. When the formal part of the meeting ended and the younger executives left for lunch, Takahashi asked Matthew for a private conversation. "Mr. Parker, your company has developed something truly remarkable," the Japanese man said as they walked toward Matthew's office. "I believe we can do much more than simply license your software." Matthew gestured for Takahashi to sit. "What do you have in mind, Mr. Takahashi?" The Japanese executive gave a faint smile before continuing. "We are expanding operations throughout Asia, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea. We need not just your software, but your vision. I'd like to propose a joint venture, a new company, headquartered in Tokyo that combines our market reach with your technology." Matthew raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. "That's an interesting proposal. It would be a substantial operation," Takahashi continued. "We are prepared to invest $200 million in the initial phase alone, and we'd like you to personally lead the project." "Me?" "Yes. Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Parker. Your ability to identify market trends and develop innovative solutions is precisely what we need. Naturally, it would require your presence in Tokyo for a significant period, at least 2 years, I'd say." Matthew kept his face neutral. Years of negotiations had taught him not to reveal surprise or hesitation, but inside he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. 2 years in Japan. "At a minimum," Takahashi confirmed. "The first 6 months would be crucial, requiring your full-time presence. Afterward, you might alternate between Tokyo and here occasionally, but it would essentially be a major life change." Matthew nodded slowly, taking it all in. "It's an ambitious proposal, Mr. Takahashi. I'll need some time to consider it properly." "Of course," the Japanese man replied, "but we'd like an answer within 2 weeks if possible. Our board meets at the end of the month." After Takahashi and his team departed, Matthew remained seated in his office, gazing out the window at the city below. The proposal was extraordinary, the kind of opportunity he would have accepted without hesitation a year ago. It was the logical next step for expanding his company, multiplying his already considerable fortune. But everything was different now. Late in the day, Matthew drove to Emma's school as usual. When he saw her running toward him with a radiant smile, he felt a wave of affection that had become familiar in recent months. "Matthew," she exclaimed, jumping into his arms as soon as he stepped out of the car. "Guess what happened today?" "What?" he asked, smiling as he helped her into the vehicle. "My teacher picked my drawing for the school's mural. And next week, we're doing a presentation about planets, and I get to be Saturn because it has rings and it's the prettiest." While Emma chatted excitedly about her day, Matthew watched her from the corner of his eye, her enthusiasm contagious. He thought about what it would mean to lose all this, the daily stories, the small triumphs, the privilege of watching this child grow and develop day by day. Arriving at Mary and Emma's house, they found Mary in the small front garden, pruning newly planted rose bushes. She waved as the car pulled up. "How was your meeting with the Japanese executives?" Mary asked, once Emma had rushed inside to show her latest schoolwork. Matthew smiled. It had become a habit to share his day with Mary, something he had never done with anyone before. She had a sensible perspective that often helped him see things from different angles. "It was interesting," he replied, helping her gather gardening tools. "They want a broader partnership, a joint venture." "That sounds good," Mary commented. "It is, except they want me to move to Tokyo for at least 2 years. Mary paused, looking at him directly. 2 years in Japan?" "At least," Matthew echoed Takahashi's words. "The first 6 months would be full-time. Then maybe I could commute back and forth occasionally." Silence fell between them as they stepped inside. Through the kitchen door they could see Emma at the table, coloring a picture of what looked like Saturn. "It's a great opportunity," Mary finally said, her voice neutral. "Financially, I imagine." "Yes, very big." "So, what are you thinking of doing?" Matthew sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I don't know. Before, it would have been an easy decision. But now..." Mary placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Emma would miss you terribly. And so would..." "Thanks, and I'd miss you both," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. In the days that followed, Matthew felt torn like never before. By day, he worked with his team on financial projections and implementation plans for the potential joint venture. The numbers were staggering. The partnership could easily double his company's value within 5 years. It was the kind of deal that made headlines, cementing his legacy in the business world. But at night, while helping Emma with her homework or listening to Mary tell stories from her time as a school teacher before retiring to raise Emma, he wondered if any amount of money could compensate for what he would lose. On a particularly difficult night, after tucking Emma into bed following her favorite bedtime story, Matthew drove back to his empty mansion. He sat in the dark living room, an untouched glass of whiskey before him, recalling how life had been before Emma entered it. Long hours at the office, constant travel, solitary meals. At the time, he'd thought it normal, the necessary price of success. Now the thought of returning to that existence, even temporarily, made him feel hollow, an emptiness no promise of financial gain could fill. The next morning during breakfast, Emma surprised him with a direct question. "Are you going away?" Matthew nearly choked on his coffee. "What? I heard you and Grandma talking about you going far away. To Japan." Her eyes were serious, almost adult-like in her small face. Matthew realized he owed her nothing less than complete honesty. "I'm thinking about it. It's for an important job. How long would you be gone?" "A long time, at least 2 years." Emma processed that silently, stirring her spoon in her cereal. "Would you visit us?" "I'd try, but it's very far. I couldn't come every day like I do now." "Then who's going to pick me up from school? Who's going to help me with my planet drawings? Who's going to watch me play Saturn in the presentation?" Each question felt like a small stone added to a growing weight in his chest. Matthew had no answers that could ease the loss she was already feeling. "I'd miss you so much," he finally said, the only simple truth in the midst of so many complexities. Emma didn't respond, but tears glistened in her eyes. She quickly tried to hide them, turning her attention back to the cereal. That night, alone in his home office, Matthew took a sheet of paper and did what he always did when faced with tough decisions. He made a list of pros and cons. In the pros column, he listed the obvious benefits of the Japanese proposal. International expansion, a significant increase in his personal fortune, new business opportunities in Asia, and global market recognition. In the cons column, he wrote only one sentence: losing what really matters. He stared at that piece of paper for a long time, the simplicity of the single item under cons stark against the long list of financial advantages. In the past, that list of pros would have easily justified any personal sacrifice. But now he understood that the single entry in the cons column, outweighed all the others combined. The following morning, Matthew arrived at the office early and asked Diane to schedule a video call with Mr. Takahashi. "Have you reached a decision, Mr. Parker?" asked the Japanese executive when his face appeared on the large conference room screen. "Yes, Mr. Takahashi. First, I want to sincerely thank you for the opportunity. It's an extraordinary proposal, and I have the utmost respect for your vision." The Japanese man nodded, his expression unreadable. "But I have commitments here I can't abandon," Matthew continued. "People who depend on me in ways that go beyond business. I can't be away that long." Takahashi studied him for a moment through the screen. "Family?" "Yes," Matthew admitted after a slight hesitation. "Family?" To his surprise, Takahashi's face softened into a smile. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Parker. In my culture, family is paramount. I respect your decision. I'm still very interested in working with your company," Matthew added quickly. "Perhaps we can arrange something that doesn't require my permanent presence in Tokyo. I have talented executives who could represent our interests there." Takahashi considered the suggestion. A different approach, but potentially feasible. "Let's explore that possibility." When the call ended, Matthew felt a tremendous weight lift from his shoulders. Instead of the sense of loss or regret he thought he might feel at turning down such a lucrative opportunity, what he experienced was profound relief, a certainty that he had done the right thing not just for Emma and Mary, but for himself as well. That afternoon he picked Emma up from school, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "I have news," he said as they drove home. "What is it?" Emma asked, swinging her legs in the passenger seat. "I decided not to go to Japan. I'm staying here." Emma turned to him, her eyes wide. "Forever?" Matthew smiled. "Forever is a long time, but I'm not going anywhere in the near future." The smile that lit Emma's face at that moment was worth more than all the millions he could have earned on the other side of the world. Later that evening, after Emma was asleep, Matthew and Mary sat on the front porch enjoying the mild autumn night. "Are you sure about your decision?" Mary asked gently. "It's quite an opportunity you're turning down." Matthew gazed at the starry sky for a moment before replying, "My whole life was dedicated to acquiring more money, more power, more success. And what did it get me? An empty house, an empty life." He paused, searching for the right words. "These past few months, for the first time, I've felt I have something that no amount of money can buy, something far more valuable." Mary nodded understandingly, a faint smile on her lips. "Emma does that to people. She reminds us what really matters." "It's not just Emma," Matthew said, looking at Mary with genuine affection. "It's you too, the two of you. Taught me more about life, about true happiness than I've learned in all my years of business." Sitting there under the starry sky, next to a woman who had become both friend and mentor, thinking of the child sleeping inside, a child who had somehow become like a daughter to him, Matthew Parker felt a peace he had never experienced from money. Turning down the Japanese offer wasn't a sacrifice, he realized. It was a privilege, the privilege to choose what truly mattered. Spring arrived in Cedar Heights, bringing a sense of renewal that seemed to mirror the changes in the lives of Matthew, Mary, and Emma. The trees in the small front yard blossomed, filling the air with sweet fragrance, while birds built their nests on the highest branches. On a particularly sunny Saturday morning, Matthew arrived carrying bags of gardening tools and plants for the little flower bed he and Emma had been planning for weeks. "I brought those sunflower seeds you wanted," he announced, as Emma opened the door, still in her pajamas. "Can I plant them today?" she asked, jumping excitedly. "Of course, right after breakfast. Where's your grandma?" "In the kitchen. She's making pancakes." Matthew smiled at the familiar aroma coming from the kitchen. Mary's pancakes, with a hint of cinnamon and vanilla, had become his favorite weekend breakfast. Quite the change for someone who used to survive on coffee and a bagel bought on the way to work. In the kitchen, Mary stirred batter in a large bowl, an old radio playing softly in the background. She looked entirely different from the frail woman Matthew had met less than a year ago. Her cheeks had color, and though she remained slim, there was strength in her movements that hadn't been there before. "Good morning," he greeted, setting the bags down. Need any help? Good morning, Matthew. You can set the table, please. Emma, go wash your hands. There was a comfortable familiarity about the scene. Matthew moved around the kitchen like someone who knew the space well, aware of where the plates, glasses, and napkins were kept. Emma, after washing her hands, helped carry the silverware to the table, while Mary skillfully flipped pancakes on the griddle. It was a simple Saturday morning ritual, but for Matthew it represented something extraordinary, belonging, something he had never truly experienced, even in his own house. After breakfast, Matthew and Emma went to work on the little garden. He dug the holes, and she carefully placed the seeds, covering them with soil and watering them. Mary watched from the porch, sipping tea, a serene smile on her face. How long until they grow? Emma asked, gazing at the freshly planted bed. It takes time, Matthew explained. We have to be patient, but if we take good care of them, water them every day, and make sure they get plenty of sun, in a few weeks we'll see the first sprouts. Just like Grandma, Emma remarked thoughtfully. She needed time to get better too. Matthew looked at the little girl, always surprised by her perceptive observations. At nearly 5 years old, Emma often said things that made him pause and reflect. Yes, exactly like your grandma, he agreed. Some of the most important things in life take time and need constant care. That afternoon after lunch, Matthew brought in something he'd left in the car, a package wrapped in colorful paper. What's that? Emma asked, curious. Open it and see. Emma tore the paper with excitement, revealing a new school folder, colored notebooks, pencils, and pens. This is for when you start real school, Matthew explained. Emma currently attended a pre-kindergarten program 3 days a week, but come September she'd officially begin kindergarten. I spoke with the principal at Cedar Grove School yesterday, Matthew continued, looking at Mary this time. It's a great private school with small classes and a special program for kids with artistic talent like Emma. Mary frowned slightly. Matthew, private schools are expensive. I want to do this, he interrupted gently. Please let me help. Emma deserves every opportunity. Mary glanced at her granddaughter, who was already testing her new colored pencils on one of the notebooks. I don't know how we can ever repay everything you've done, she said quietly. Matthew shook his head. It's not about repayment, Mary. It never was. And truly it wasn't. Over the past months, Matthew had discovered that giving not just money or material things, but time, attention, and care brought him a fulfillment no acquisition had ever provided. Weeks turned into months, and the comfortable rhythm of their intertwined lives continued. Matthew still ran his company, but he delegated more responsibilities, reduced his working hours, and refused business trips that would keep him away for more than 2 days. The joint venture with the Japanese thrived, even without his physical presence in Tokyo. Instead, he held late-night video conferences from his home office once Emma was asleep. It wasn't the ideal arrangement for business, but it was perfect for what Matthew now considered his true priorities. One particularly pleasant Sunday, Matthew suggested a picnic in the city park. It was something simple, but Emma greeted the idea with excitement, helping Mary prepare sandwiches and fruit while Matthew fetched a basket and a blanket from his house. At the park, they found a spot beneath a large tree by the lake. Children played in the distance, ducks swam lazily, and the blue sky was dotted with fluffy white clouds. That one looks like a dragon, said Emma, lying on the blanket and pointing to a particularly stretched out cloud. I see a dog, Matthew countered, lying beside her. Look, those could be its ears. You're both wrong, Mary interjected with a laugh. It's obviously a cat. Look at that long tail. The three of them laughed, continuing the game with the other clouds, playfully debating their shapes. It was such a simple activity, almost trivial, yet it represented something money could never buy. Genuine moments of shared happiness. In the late afternoon, as they headed home, Emma walked between Matthew and Mary, holding both their hands. Occasionally, they swung her off the ground, causing her to burst into giggles. This was the best day, Emma declared once they arrived, her face flushed from the sun and excitement. That evening, after dinner, while Mary washed dishes and Matthew dried them. He reflected on how much his life had changed. "What's on your mind?" Mary asked, noticing his contemplative silence. "How simple things can bring so much happiness," he replied honestly. "I spent most of my adult life chasing what I thought would make me happy: money, success, recognition. Now I see that true happiness was in things I never valued before." Mary smiled, handing him another plate to dry. "Sometimes we have to lose something important before we appreciate what really matters," she said, "or find someone who shows." "That's a different path," Matthew replied, thinking of Emma and the lost suitcase that had changed the course of all their lives. Summer flew by with days full of little adventures: trips to the zoo, afternoons at the public pool, ice cream enjoyed on the porch while watching the sunset. Matthew was present for all these moments, balancing his corporate responsibilities with what he now considered his most important role, being part of Emma and Mary's life. One August afternoon, Matthew arrived for dinner with exciting news. "Remember that empty lot by the park? I just bought it." "What for?" Mary asked, curious. "I'm going to build a community center there. It'll have a library, a space for art activities, and after-school programs for kids who have nowhere to go while their parents work." Mary looked at him with surprise and admiration. "That's wonderful, Matthew. What inspired you?" Matthew glanced at Emma, who was sitting at the kitchen table, engrossed in her drawing. "I realized there are lots of children out there like Emma, smart, curious, full of potential, who just need a chance. Someone to believe in them, to give them opportunities." The community center project became a passion for Matthew. He involved Emma in the process, asking her what children might like to see there. Mary also contributed, drawing on her experience as a former teacher to suggest educational programs and activities to benefit local families. It was a tangible way for Matthew to use his wealth for more than just accumulating, something that could make a real difference in the lives of others, just as Emma and Mary had made a difference in his. September arrived, and with it, Emma's first day at her new school. Matthew made sure he was there, taking the morning off to accompany her along with Mary. Emma was nervous but excited, dressed in her neatly pressed uniform and carrying the new backpack Matthew had given her. "What if nobody likes me?" she asked, voicing a typical child's fear on the first day of school. "Impossible," Matthew replied confidently. "They're all going to love you. Just be yourself." After walking her to the classroom and meeting her teacher, Matthew and Mary left together. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked, surprised by the paternal anxiety in his own voice. Mary smiled, recognizing the concern. "She'll be great. Emma is resilient and adaptable. She had to learn that very early." That night, after Emma excitedly reported on her first day, her new friends, the kind teacher, the fun activities, they sat on the porch to enjoy the mild weather. Matthew had brought a telescope, and they took turns looking at the moon and stars. When it was time for Emma to go to bed, Mary helped her get ready, leaving Matthew alone with his thoughts on the porch. He gazed at the starry sky, reflecting on how much his perspective had changed. The things that once seemed so important, acquisitions, expansions, record profits, now felt trivial compared to the small daily moments of genuine connection he experienced with Emma and Mary. A few minutes later, Mary returned to the porch. "Emma's asking if you'll tell her a bedtime story," Matthew smiled and headed inside. Emma's room was cozy, painted a soft yellow with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. She was already in bed, clutching the ragged rabbit Mary had sewn for her. "Which story do you want tonight?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "The one about the prince who learned that real treasure wasn't gold," Emma answered promptly. It was a story Matthew had invented weeks before, about a lonely prince who discovered the value of friendship. He began telling it in a gentle voice, watching Emma's eyelids grow heavy as sleep approached. When he finished, Emma was nearly asleep. Matthew stood up carefully, not wanting to disturb her, but before he could leave, she called to him in a sleepy voice. "Matthew." "Yes, Emma." "You're part of our family now," she said simply, with that childlike directness. Matthew felt something tighten in his chest, a surge of emotion so intense that for a moment he couldn't speak. No, he managed finally, and I'm very grateful for that. Emma smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes, drifting into sleep. Matthew lingered for a moment, watching her breathe, awed by the transformative power this small child had on his life. When he finally left the room, he found Mary standing in the hallway, having overheard their exchange. "She's right, you know," Mary said softly. "You are family now." Mary's eyes shone with quiet emotion. Matthew realized she too had been transformed by this journey, from a worried grandmother with failing health to a serene woman, confident that Emma would always be cared for and loved no matter what happened. "You both saved my life," Matthew admitted, his voice low but intense. "I had everything money could buy, but I was empty inside. You showed me what really matters." Mary smiled and gently touched his arm. "I think we all saved each other," she said wisely. Later, driving back to his own house, a home that, for all its luxury, had never felt as welcoming as Mary and Emma's, Matthew reflected on the incredible journey triggered by a lost suitcase. He was still Matthew Parker, the successful businessman. His bank account still boasted impressive figures, and his company thrived more than ever. But the real wealth, he realized, wasn't in any of those financial assets. It was in Saturday mornings making pancakes together, in the colorful drawings taped to his refrigerator door, in the nightly phone calls Emma insisted on making on the soul. Days they didn't see each other, in the grateful, loving look in Mary's eyes, in the small rituals and traditions they'd developed together, building something precious and rare, a family chosen by the heart. Matthew Parker had finally discovered what it truly meant to be rich, and no amount of money on earth could compare to that treasure.